Okay, let's go ahead and work through some of the content we've been discussing in class. We'll do this together. I'm going to open up Blender, and you're going to see we're going to wind up as usual in the default Blender space. I'm going to say File Open, and we're going to navigate wherever that might be that we have. On mine, it's on my hard drive here. I'm going to go to GB and open up the start file. And you're going to see when we bring this in, we're going to have the dreaded purple image plane issue. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and deal with that? Let's start finding out more about it. We knew for a while now in class that this meant it lost its connection to the files. The question was why, and I found out why. It's that people opened the file on the USB drive that we gave out in class, but they didn't save right away. They just left the file alone and then unplug the USB drive, and so it gets disconnected from the files. So why don't we go ahead and fix this? One of the things that we can do is we can come in here and we can say external data, and one of the options is we can automatically save future files into the Blender file, so that hopefully becomes a non-issue after that. Okay, the other option we can do is making the paths relative, and what that means is instead of looking for an absolute place like the C drive for the image when it was looking initially for the file, it's going to make it relative. So wherever the file is, it's going to look based on that position of the file, which is a much easier thing for new users. So I'm going to enable that, then I'm going to save this. I'll save this as the next higher file number. We'll save it to the same place. Okay, and you'll see here that right now as it is, we haven't really completely fixed the problem. The one other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we copy the files that need to be there. I'm going to change this to looking at it in the details. We need to copy these files over to the location where we saved our file. That might sound a little intimidating if you're not used to the operating system, but hopefully you've been practicing the stuff from the operating system handout that I gave in class. So we're going to go ahead and let's talk about the different ways we can select these files. The easiest way is to use a hotkey. Hold down the modifier key of Control. So do Control and then tap A, and it's the same as saying Select All. I have these two files as well, which are the actual Blender files. I don't want to bring those with since we already had that in a folder. So I'm going to deselect those by just holding down Control and then clicking each one independently. Okay, another way we could have done this, we could have just clicked and drawn a pick box around all of these files. Okay, there's always a bunch of different ways we can do this. Then let's talk about copying. Obviously, I would like the students to use the hotkey, which is Control-C, which I've just done. Another option would be to right-click and choose Copy from that menu. And yet another option, again, would be to come up to the Home tab and click Copy. All right, we've done 3 different versions of that. Let's go ahead and navigate to where this file now currently is. So for me, this is where that file is, and you can see the newer save that we created. I'm going to paste these. Again, I have a bunch of different options. I'm going to use the hotkey. We could also right-click and say Paste, and we could also from the Home tab say Paste. But we're going to hold down Control, the modifier key, and we're going to hit Control-V as in Victor. So that's the same as Paste. I usually like when there's a mnemonic device between what it is and what it does. For example, copy, Control-C, the letter C for copy is intuitive, but Control-V for paste, there's nothing intuitive about that. So just realize that's just the next key over on the keyboard when you're working in Windows, so it's at least a little bit intuitive that way. So now we have the files now in the correct location within the operating system. I'm going to close this down, and I'm also going to close Blender. I'm going to reopen Blender. Okay, and then we're going to open up that new file again. We're going to go to the O2 start. We're going to open up that file, and now look at that. Now our missing image file problem is better. Okay, now let's talk about our file setup a little bit. Let's go ahead and turn off the things that we don't want to see. For example, this right here. That's our camera. We don't need to see that in the file while we're working. Okay, another thing we will not need to be able to see right now is the light. So we can just turn off the light as well. Now, one of the things that's come up in class is people have been asking how to change the opacity of this image that's in here. And what we can do is we can come down here and we can change the transmission setting. I can click and then type in a value, or I could slide the slider, and that changes the opacity. You can see that got a lot more transparent. I'm going to change it to 0.9. Let's really go for it. And you can see that makes that much easier to look through. So why don't we go ahead and do the same thing for the side view, because each object right now as it stands has its own shader applied. So we're going to go to transmission again. All right, and I'm going to type in 0.9 and hit enter. So now the images are a little bit easier to work with. We can also turn them on and off in the upper right up here. We can turn them off and back on again. All right, and there we go. We have the setup for the file. Let's go ahead for this particular video and finish setting this up. Let's go ahead and add. We're going to add a mesh. And remember, what we were doing is we were creating a cylinder to start with for this airplane. I'm going to zoom in with the middle mouse, and we want to make the number of edges going around here, we want to make it 12, if you remember from the things we discussed in class. Right now it says vertices is 32, which is a little counterintuitive to me, but we can just change that to 12 here, and it's the equivalent of turning this into 12 faces. Okay? Then remember, I would like us all to work consistently. We could work with the, if you notice right now, the peak of where that is right at the center line. I usually like to work for this example, I like to work with the flat. So what we have to do is rotate that cylinder enough to put the flat at the center. And so what we do is we come over here and we type 15 degrees, and that 15 degrees makes it so that the flat is at the center now for our cylinder. And remember, this add cylinder dialog is only good until we deselect the cylinder. Now that that's gone for good. That's one of the things I'm not a huge fan of inside of Blender, but there you have it. Okay, and then now we could rotate this. I'm going to hit R on the keyboard, which is the rotate tool. Okay, and I'm not a fan of the way that this defaults, by the way, in the rotate tool. So I'm going to click off of that. I'm going to unselect that. I'm going to choose the rotate icon up here instead. And you can see what that does is, instead of rotating, when I hit the hotkey for that, what it did is it rotated relative to the screen. But the problem right now is that the screen is tipped in a weird view. So I noticed a lot of people were winding up with their cylinder not following along with the grid. So this will make sure that the cylinder is following along with the grid, and that now we can activate one of the cardinal axes. So we want to rotate this in the green, which is in Y, and then we can start to rotate that, and while it's rotating we can hold down control. If you notice, when I'm holding control, it enables me to snap the increment I'm going by. Another thing I can do is add shift into the mix, and you can see adding shift makes the increments much smaller. But visually you can see here that this looks pretty straight relative to the grid, and you can double check by looking over here and seeing that we've rotated the cylinder 90 degrees. So there you have it. Right now we're doing a pretty good job of setting this up to start. Let's go ahead and move this cylinder a little bit. Let's move it up. Oop, I'll grab the wrong object. Let's go ahead. We'll grab that, and we will move this up, and we will also move it forward. Okay, and then we would like to size it relative to the airplane. So why don't we go ahead and turn off we want the side plane turned off. So there you go, and then I would like to scale this up. Remember, when you're scaling, to scale it uniformly, you actually want to scale from this outside circle. That's a uniform scale. We're going to scale this up until we see that it's kind of matching what's going on. The problem right now is that it's too high. So we can go back to move, we can grab this, and we can optimize it. I'm going to try to make sure there's about the same amount hanging off of both sides of this here. It's easier to do in an orthographic view if I click that view, and I'm sort of centering that as best I can, and then we will again go to scale, and we'll scale this up, and we'll scale that until it's fitting the body of the airplane pretty well. We might get a different result once we smooth this, so why don't we smooth it even though the faces on the ends are still there. Let's go ahead and add this smooth modifier, and remember, it's called subdivision surface. Alright, and then we can go ahead and we can add in viewport levels, not render levels, and you can see that right now that creates a very bizarre result. So let's undo that. Let's talk about the different things we can do and what might go wrong. So if you see that result, let's go ahead and delete those two end faces that we know are no good. We want to get out of object mode and we want to go into edit mode. If you remember, the hotkey for that is tab. So I'm going to hit tab. We're going to select the face. Oh, I didn't go into face select. So let's go into face select up here. Select the face on the end, hit delete, and then choose faces. We'll hit the other one, we'll hit delete and choose faces. Okay, so now we have an open tube. So when we go to up-res this now in the subdivision, you'll notice that the result is much more predictable. And now we can get a sense that once it's smooth, you can see that we're still not quite big enough. So let's get back into object mode. All right, we have scale selected, and let's scale this up that little bit just to tweak us to where we're really comfortable with the size of the airplane. Again, be as careful as you can be as you're doing this, but if it's off a tiny bit, that's not going to be the killer here. What we're really doing is learning how to model something. The absolute pixel precision is another issue. Do your best. Okay, so I'm going to down-res this again to what's called the base mesh. So now we're down to the base mesh. We have used a default cylinder, we've made it 12-sided, we've deleted the end caps, we've sized it up, we've added the subdivision surface on there so that we can make it higher resolution, and at this point we, in a way, are ready to start modeling. I've noticed in my file here, for some reason, we've lost the naming of these layers. So why don't we go ahead and name these? I'm going to double click that and I'm going to call this one top view, and I usually put an underscore on my words. That's a good programming practice. And then with this one we're going to call it side view underscore. Alright, so side view and top view, and now we know which one is which if we want to turn them off, and we are good to go. Now, what's my religious joke all the time is that Jesus saves, and saves often. So we will go ahead and we will say save as, not save. You don't want to keep overriding the same file. We want to do progressive saves, which means we're just going to come in and change the number on the end and hit save. I hit enter, and then we're going to have to hit this one more time. Okay, and we have saved the file. I'm going to stop this video here right now so that we can keep these bite-sized, and I'll continue on in the next video.